what stood out for you tonight, Gayatri? As you read it, did something jump out at you that was meaningful?
Failing to get these things according to my perfectionist dreams and specifications. I bring this to my step 10 now, thinking at where where am I selfish? Or so when I look at that, I'm actually looking at what kind of unhealthy expectations am I setting in this situation. That life is not fair. There's no rule that life has to conform to my expectations. It's the other way around. So yeah, that's what stood out to me the most.
God, it's such an important awareness, isn't it? And epiphany for me. I mean, when I remember when I realized that I had done what Bill had talked about, is that I had turned things around, right? I expected life to conform to my expectations instead of figuring out how I could meet the challenges that life was setting before me. And that becomes such a critical turnaround because that's what gives me a chance to start growing up and becoming mature. Are you feeling like you're becoming mature, Gayatri?
I'm definitely learning.
You are.
Definitely,
You are.
yes,
I know. We
definitely
all
learning.
are. We are. And that's the wonderful thing that's happening in this community that we've created is we're all kind of growing together. Okay. Well, we have just finished. Last week was the wrap on going through the 12 and 12 and trying to extract from it Bill's comments and ideas that gave us some idea of how he was thinking about emotional sobriety. It was been a long journey, and I hope you found it be a very useful discussion that we've had over, God, it's what, over a year, I think, at this particular point in time. Tonight, and maybe next week, we will continue it. We'll see how far we get. I want to kind of step back now and take an overview. I've been doing this now for about 25, 30 years in terms of really studying, applying, writing about, presenting workshops on with myself, Herb, and I all over Southern California. And now we've gone to St. Louis and some other places. And now Tom and I are traveling and carrying this message all over in workshops, and other people are doing study groups with the book. A lot has happened. There's been a lot of water that's passed under that bridge of emotional sobriety. And what I've done the last couple days, probably the last week, I've kind of stepped back and I've tried to look at the landscape of emotional sobriety. And I want to share those reflections for you, which will kind of be, I think, kind of a summary of what we know today and what we have learned as we've started this journey, or as I've started this journey and shared it with you. And, you know, as you heard Tom Rutledge say, and Tom Potash, and anybody that's been here, we've all been growing together with this. My understanding of emotional sobriety has really deepened because of these Thursday night workshops and us every week staying, you know, present to what is emotional sobriety and what does it mean in our life. And with that kind of discipline and practice we've had for over 4 years now, I'm starting to really integrate this stuff at a very, very deep level in my life, and I hope you are too. Um, So, with that being said, let me share the slides I prepared for tonight. A hallmark of emotional sobriety is developing a consciousness of our experience and what it means. And so we really approach our life with this curiosity about how come I'm reacting this way? What does this mean for me? Now, you notice I didn't say why are we reacting this way? Because I think the what and how questions are better than why questions. What's going on with me? What's creating this reaction I'm having? How how am I experiencing this? What's got me so upset when things aren't going the way I want them to go? How do I deal with that when I feel that way? So I start to become aware of these things, And as we work with this, when I say we learn to navigate the inner landscape of our life, we start to figure out how to deal with our dumb and raging Mr. or Mrs. Hyde and to bring the best of us forward. And as we do this, we're starting to grow and mature. You see, maturity is a function of learning from our experiences. And if we learn from our experiences and we take the information and the experiences we're having and we integrate that into learning how to show up for ourselves, to show up for our lives, to show up for our relationships in a very, very different way. So, learning to navigate the inner landscape of our lives is very important. The next one is that we experience a renewed sense of power to manage our life. Now, remember, we talked about taking a second first step, which focuses on that the emotional dependency has created what Bill called an impossible way of life, that our lives can become unmanageable because at a very early age, we decided that we could be only okay if we managed everything in our life, which does the opposite, right? It creates an unmanageability because there are going to be a lot of things in my life that are not within my ability and possibility to control and manage. In fact, one of the things that we've learned as we've been on this journey is that growing up is kind of an interesting thing. Instead of having control, what happens is in order to learn how to best cope with a situation, we need to let the situation we're in inform us as to how best to cope with it. So that our job is to find the right response to how we're being challenged. Now, that's very different than what happened or how we functioned before. Because before our functioning became so rigid and stereotyped. We lost flexibility because when you're controlling, you don't have flexibility. You're trying to demand that things be a certain way. Well, when I let go of that things have to be a certain way and I shift that over, my job is to find a way to best deal with this. Now, all kinds of new possibilities exist. I was working with someone today between totally surrendering their position or what we call being submissive, right? Totally giving themselves up, erasing themselves. At the other end of the pole, and there's always the other side of it, is being aggressive. And now, not surrendering yourself, but trying to control somebody else. And they were dealing with a certain situation in life, and we said, we were exploring all of the possibilities that existed along that continuum. And what we wanted to do was get to the middle, where remember emotional sobriety, and I'll have that on a slide later on, is learning to act for yourself without being selfish, which is going to be kind of in the middle of those two responses. Well, we were exploring everything right around that median on more of the aggressive side and then more of the submissive side, and exploring which of those might be possible. And the cool thing about it is that what we have to discover is which of those is the best fit for us and who we are. So it's really a really cool thing. But this new sense is that what we realize is that there are so many other possibilities than the black and white thinking that ended up existing because of us deciding that we had to be someone other than we were to be okay. When we decided to actualize a concept of who we should be, rather than to actualize our real self, our world became a world of absolutes. You were either good and bad. You were either right or wrong. You were either um, aware or unaware. There was no middle ground. You were either in charge or in control or out of control. There was nothing in between. And that's what I mean by living rigidly and stereotyped. When the world becomes black and white, there's only two choices. Okay. Well, we end up getting some separation from the big lie. That is gained. And what I mean by the big lie is the lie that says life has to conform to my expectations for me to be okay. Life has to be what I want it to be or demand it to be or think it should be for me to be happy, for me to be content, for me to be satisfied, for me to feel good about myself and to feel good about my experience in life. We start to realize that that idea has generated so much dependence on our environment to be a certain way for us to be okay. And what it's created is this consciousness that says the theme of that consciousness, I'm okay if, or I'd be okay if this didn't happen. It's an I'm okay if consciousness. And that is a serious problem for us. Old triggers no longer have the power to control our lives. Where before, we got, oh my God, I know one of my old triggers, like, my God, don't call me names. Well, you could call me any names you want. If I react to that and I take that personally, it means that I agree with you. And I no longer think you're calling me names is a problem. Is what the problem is that I haven't faced something about myself that you are putting in my face and giving me a chance to look at. And the more I can use that to grow myself, the less I'm being controlled by those things that I don't want to face. So what Dr. David Snart said, it was really great. He says, we talk about people pushing our button. He says, but the truth is, people don't come up to you and push your button. You're holding your button out, and you're inviting people to push that button all the time. That's what's going on. And you're holding it out usually in a way that you're even unconscious of. As I start to develop a solid yet flexible sense of myself, I don't have to defend your idea of who you think I am. I know who I am. What you're saying isn't defining me. What I know defines me. Because I'm not dependent on you liking me for my self-esteem. I can be okay with you having any opinion or thought or talk to me in any way that you need to talk to me. I don't have to have rules for our engagement. I don't need to make rules for how you're supposed to act. It's talk about freedom. And that's really when you start to think about emotional sobriety, what we're really talking about is the quest for freedom. The quest for freedom so that we can be our own person and not lose ourselves in relationships or not alienate ourselves and fall out of the other side of bed, act like we don't need anyone, that we're able to balance our need for togetherness with our sense of our individuality. Bill talks about that all the time when he defines emotional sobriety. It's the real maturity and balance, he calls it. And that's a big part of the landscape of emotional sobriety is this balance. New behavior and patterns begin to emerge slowly. They become realistic alternatives to the old self-destructive patterns that are driven by our emotional dependency. Change is really very much a process of learning and having new experiences, paying attention to what those need, becoming aware of them, figuring out what is missing, And this is very important, is what is missing in my development that if I could develop that skill or that capacity, I could cope with this situation a lot better. That inquiry is so important in our growth and our maturity. And as we start to learn how to deal with these things better, we stop being self-destructive because we're no longer dependent on that relationship to be okay. We can show up in that relationship and create a lot of space for the other person. You see, love really needs air. It has to breathe. It has to breathe to be able to grow, to thrive, just like we need air. We need air to be able to grow and to breathe and to become what we can be, but so does love. So it needs a lot of space. But emotional dependency sucks that space out of relationships, either by us being so dependent on the other person or being completely independent from them. In either case, whether we fall out of one side of the bed or the other, the air, the oxygen is being sucked out of our relationship. Okay, I gotta progress my slide too. Ah, there you go. When our behavior and emotions and intents are congruent with our values and standards. You see, we start to become aware of, are my feet moving in the direction that I'm talking about? If I'm saying I'm giving somebody space and I send them 50 text messages, what I'm saying is incongruent with what I'm doing. If I say I'm leaving space for you in a relationship, but then demanding that you do things the way I want you to, because if you love me, you would do what I want you to do, my behavior is incongruent with my intention. Sometimes we are aware of the incongruence. Many times we are not. If I'm talking to somebody and they're talking about a difficult situation, oftentimes I will see a person smile. That smile is incongruent with the words, with the music that they're playing. And the smile, when I look at it, I'll stop somebody and I'll say, I just want you to become aware of that smile. And they go, wow, I wasn't aware I was smiling. You are smiling. Do you have any sense of what your smiling is saying to me? Because remember, all our behavior serves a function. And oftentimes they will say things like, my smile is saying, don't worry about me. I'm in a lot of pain, but I'll take care of it. Or I'm embarrassed that I'm feeling this way. I'm ashamed that I'm even bothered by this. You see, the smile is sending another message. If that person was congruent as they caught themselves smiling when they're talking, they would say, oh my God, I just smiled when I shared that with you. And inside, I'm not smiling. I'm so sad. I'm in a lot of pain right now. But I can feel that I have a hard time letting you know that. I just want to smile and kind of push my pain away. I want to just avoid it. And that's why I smile. I say, don't take this too serious. See, when we start to do this work, we use our awareness to become aware of how we're functioning. And if I can attend to how I'm functioning in the here and now, it's in the here and now that I'm going to discover emotional sobriety. It's going to be how I show up and become aware of myself, become aware of you, how I navigate the landscape within myself and between us. That's going to give me ample opportunities to start growing myself in this direction to create more and more emotional autonomy. Another part of the landscape is being cautious that we don't give away our emotional center of gravity. See, as we become aware that Emotional sobriety involves supporting ourselves, which means keeping our emotional center of gravity over our two emotional feet. And when I'm emotionally dependent on you, I transfer my center of emotional gravity into you because now you have the power to make me feel okay. I have abdicated my personal responsibility and I've turned my will and my life over to the care of Tom or Susie or Jane or whomever in my life. When I'm interacting and I'm operating with the consciousness that develops with emotional sobriety, and I pay attention to my somatic experiencing, sometimes I can feel my emotional center of gravity leaving my body. When I feel that, I don't feel grounded. I feel shaky. Sometimes it comes with anxiety. When my emotional center of gravity is over me, I feel very confident. I feel like I can take on and deal with a lot of issues. But if you're holding my emotional center of gravity, you can pull me off. I will let you pull me off balance very quickly. We focus on learning from our mistakes. If I'm right that we suffer from a growth disorder, that we're not sick, we're stuck, that our cure is to grow up and to start to or to continue the development that has been arrested. Partly arrested maybe from the time that we drank and used, arrested partly from the level of maturity that our family had when we were growing up, because we typically leave our family with the highest level of maturity that they've achieved, which oftentimes is not very high, right? When we really look at how our families function, they're functioning on the low end of that spectrum. But also, our level of maturity is determined by our culture. Our culture is a very immature, it's a culture that breeds narcissism. Maturity requires an awareness of self and others. Our society makes everything about us. That's where our development got stuck. We're stuck in the it's all about me syndrome. That's why we take so many things personally. As we start to learn, we realize we start to come to the awareness that that is that self-centeredness that Bill talked about. Our self will run riot, our selfishness. And we start to see that everything's not about us. My God. And when I become right-sized and have that kind of humility, now I start to experience my relationships in a very different way. When somebody is saying something, I'm not focused on how they feel about me. You see, when I make it all about me, all my self-esteem is always on the line. It's always at risk. It's always in jeopardy. So I'm constantly focusing on, are you telling me I'm acceptable or not? Are you telling me I'm lovable or not? Are you telling me I'm okay or I'm not? As I learn that it's not all about me and that it's my job to go ahead instead of looking at you with what we call other validated self-esteem, I start to learn how to validate myself. I start to see myself. I start to have critical thinking. And I realize that I can become the final arbiter of what's right or what's wrong for me. I don't need you to decide that. I can think myself through that. I'm capable of that. And so I start taking that center of gravity back and I start learning how to do this. I have to make a lot of mistakes along the way, just like you did when you were walking, just like we did when we walked. We made a lot of mistakes. How many? As many as we needed to till we figured it out. But the big difference between being an adult and a kid, when you make mistakes as a kid and an infant, they don't have that should monster in their head that tells them that they should figure this out quicker. They should be more than they are. They should be different than they are. They just fall and pick themselves up, cry a little bit, maybe for a few seconds, and get on with it and try it again. If we can adopt that attitude in our life and learn from our mistakes, we're going to be growing ourselves up. We're going to experience emotional maturity. We develop an appropriate and honest relationship with reality because we no longer have this belief that things have to be a certain way for us to be okay, that life has to look a certain way, has to function a certain way, has to be a certain way for us to be okay. When we start to surrender that, we can, instead of looking for reality to be what we want it to be, which is what happens with a consciousness that is immature. You see, when I'm immature, then my consciousness is only going to be focusing on what I would call irrelevant information. Am I going to get what I want from this experience? Is this person saying something about me? Is my self-esteem on the line? Well, when I'm mature and I let go of it's all about me, I can show up and say, what's going on in this situation? What's happening in this? Instead of taking it personally, I can start seeing the situation as it is, not as a reflection of me, but as a reflection of reality. The more I'm able to align myself with that reality and deal with whatever's coming up, whether it's frustration, sadness, grief, anger, whatever it is, whatever's coming up, when I can deal with that as it is and have an honest and appropriate relationship with reality, that's when I start to learn to cope. When I start to grow up and start to figure things out. Because we've avoided frustration and pain, we've deprived ourselves of so many experiences that would help us become who we can be. A lot of our problem comes down to our lack of faith in our ability to grow and to handle our frustration and pain. We strive to live a life free of shoulds, musts, and have tos. When our life is dominated by a shoulds, must, and have tos, it means our false self is in charge and running the show. And now the tail is wagging the dog. We're not running our life. All of these ideas about who we're supposed to be are. And in many ways, we end up leaving ourselves out of our life. I'll never forget, I had a patient once that said, I'm realizing that this work that we're doing is helping me audition for a speaking part in my own life. I love how he said that. I'm getting a speaking part in my own life. We're getting our voice back. We're recovering our possibilities and we're recovering our real self. So we're going to continue this discussion of the landscape of emotional sobriety next week. Carly, do you mind joining us for the discussion? Is that cool? I think you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. No.
Got it. Got it.
I'm
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I
All
just
right.
need your co-host so you can unmute yourself at will.
Alan, we also it's good to balance things out because just it's not just us old guys. You know,
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
True.
you
I,
old guys.
yeah, for a long time I used to call this
Watch out,
group.
Tom. You're that tweener. You're the tweener, Tom.
I used to call this group four old guys finally speak out. It's like thank God we need to hear from the old white guys.
Yeah, that's it.
You finally get a voice.
Well, please comment on some of the points that I made with this and what they've meant to you, or if you want to, expand the discussion of any one of those, please feel free.
I actually have something. Were you talking to Tom or were you talking? Did you open it up?
Anybody, opening it up.
It was interesting because I took some notes right when you started and you were talking about the landscape of emotional sobriety. And I've led some meditations. And the thing that I thought was so interesting is that meditation is really to be in touch with the landscape of our emotional, it's connecting with the emotional landscape. And it's, it's on a somatic level, and then it's not only connecting with it, but how do we relate to the emotional landscape? So are we meeting our human experience with kindness or with judgment or with criticism or with tightness? Or is there a sense of openness and compassion and understanding? So it when you're talking about the landscape and then in a more quiet reflective, it's really from a somatic perspective too, of like the lived experience, not just the conceptual experience. So it begins to integrate the mind and the body and the spirit. And then the last thing I'll say too is that um, when we're in touch with our inner landscape, it's how we meet ourselves. And how we meet ourselves is often the way we meet life and the way we meet others. So, learning to be with ourselves in the human predicament and the messiness of being human. It starts with us first and ripples out into communities and friendships and families and etc. So that's my
Yeah.
Right. Nice
Beautiful.
reflection.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carly. I took a note of that. How we meet ourselves is often how we meet others. I think
Yep.
it's so true. Although I'm sometimes able to have more compassion for others than I am for myself.
That's so true. So true. Me too.
Yeah.
I've cultivated that one and turned it into a career.
One of the things which it stepped up for me because we just did this is the separation from the big lie. And in the work group, the study group, before this meeting, we did sentence completion exercises from your book, the chapter Discerning Our Emotional Dependency. And one of the reasons it's so important is number one, it gets it out, right? It's no longer just in my head, and these feelings and these lies I've created about myself and how the world's supposed to, show up for me in order for me to be okay. But then to hear the whole group share theirs out loud as well, and the identification amongst each other about, if I admit I'm emotionally dependent, it means I'm weak, right? Or whatever the lies are that we've assembled over the years, and it takes the energy out of it, and it puts that separation between me and the lie, and I could start to work on it. So
Yes.
it really stood out for me tonight.
It's a powerful moment when you realize I've been lying to myself. That's powerful. That's such a powerful moment, man. It just there's what happens is it starts to reorganize our personality in some very significant ways.
And it's the paradoxical theory of change. Is that the right what it's called? So I
Exactly.
have to name it to claim it. It's in
Mhm.
AA parlance.
I claim it to change it.
Name it to change it. There you go.
And it's also what's so freeing at the
Oh
same
yeah.
time. Like what we contract around and hold is actually the medicine to free us.
Hmm. That's a great way to say it, Carly. Yeah, isn't it interesting that the cure is in the problem? Hmm.
It's like a homeopathic remedy.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing I'm thinking about, Alan, is you're doing that, and I always write more notes than I can keep up with when you or Herb, or in the old days when Roger was talking. It's like well, never could keep up with Roger. But it's you know I uh, I'm always interested in process and seldom interested in content. I've told you before that sometimes couples in particular get frustrated with me because really couples come in initially with couples therapy because they want the therapist to tell them they're right and their partner's wrong. It's like, you see what I'm dealing with here. But the truth is, what we're always looking at is, and what emotional sobriety is looking at is not what, but how. How are we doing this? And to me, the thing I thought about the bigger picture, panning back to the big picture of the landscape, is we're talking about learning to live in the note I made here was learning to live in the raw material rather
Yeah.
than always classifying and categorizing. It's like uh, what we're doing is instead becoming investigators and observers, and we're not always looking for a conclusion. It's like and I'll just tell one quick story. I was dealing with a guy today that was his sister wanted him to come to therapy because of his alcoholism, and he almost didn't come, and he didn't want to come because he said because he wasn't sure he was ready to commit to change, and so we just started there. I said that's an assumption that showing up and sitting in this room with me is a commitment to change because that's not where I'm going to start. It's like if you need sometimes we just need to talk about it before you even make a decision. And so we, and I learned a lot of this from you guys and specifically from Roger when he was talking about the acceptances he's basically conflicted about his own denial system about alcoholism. My lights are going weird. But and so, what I think was at least surprise to him was that no, we can start talking about that, and there's not any assumption. The other thing, as you know very well, to dispel this idea that the therapist is ever going to have any authority over you. It's like you and I've said that we agree on the idea that not only do I not have any authority over you, I don't want any authority over you. What I love to do is walk beside people and guide them. And I think that, and being the observer and not having to have the conclusions, it's just, and I don't know if I could explain it, but to me that lands right in the middle of the recovering from the conditional. I'll be okay when
Yeah.
I'll be okay. I'll be okay as soon as I understand this. I'll be okay as soon as I have figured this out. It's like, no, it's like first of all, if you think that's the case, you've been on the planet for a while. Notice that you figured a lot of things out, and you're not okay. It's like that doesn't make you okay. It's like no, you're okay. Just, you're just okay, and that's difficult all the way to offensive to some people.
Yeah.
We're so attached to our way of wanting to think things through. So there's and many more things, but I love the way I love the pan back to the landscape. So thanks for that.
Tom, I like what you said because I just had an experience with someone in a recovery online community that I'm part of it. He said, I didn't want to come back until I had a plan, right? It's like, no. We want it messy. Like, like especially, people who, are in the grips of the disease of active
Yeah,
addiction. It's like,
yeah,
if you wait for that, it will never happen. Like
right.
emotional sobriety is the same thing. Is if I waited to get my shit together in order to start showing up and doing the work,
I'm
I'd
talking
never
about
get there. Yeah.
right. That's the raw material, and it's like one of the metaphors that I use. I say you don't take your best running car to the mechanic and say, listen to this engine. It sounds so good. No, and I tell them bring me bring me the clunker in your mind, the one that's smoking and making all kinds of squeaking noises. Bring your crazy in here, and then we can work with it. And part of what they're gonna learn hanging out with me or really probably any of you is like that immediately they're not the only crazy person in the room. As soon as we start talking, there's another crazy person in the room who's actually having a conversation with them.